Reporting from Arkham Asylum, this is Gotham Rogues. In this video we take a look at the Batman episodes, the rubber face of comedy and the clay face of tragedy. These episodes, which form the two-parter that introduced Clayface and the Batman, were written by Greg Weisman and directed by Sam Liu and Seung-Eun Kim, or however you pronounce that. In the first part we find that nefarious knave the Joker on the loose and up to his usual shenanigans. For this crime wave, the Clown Prince used a new weapon called Joker Putty, a substance which can turn its targets into clay. Naturally, the police stand no chance against this menace, completely failing in apprehending the Joker. Meanwhile, Police Chief Rojas is fed up with the Gotham PD being considered an incompetent laughingstock and introduces a new zero-tolerance policy against so-called freaks, putting the Batman himself as priority number one. This is something which Detective Ethan Bennet takes an issue with, as he's the only cop on the force who sympathizes with the masked manhunter. He also just happens to be old friends with Bruce Wayne, although without knowing his secrets. Bennet is forced to go against his beliefs though, and try and capture Batman on orders from Rojas. Meanwhile, the Joker is insulted and grows jealous when he hears that it's his hated nemesis Batman who's deemed public enemy number one and not him. He then decides to show Gotham who the true menace is by ramping up his crime wave and kidnapping Detective Bennet, putting him through one really bad day, which involves messing with his mind and subjecting him to the Joker Putty. In the next episode, Bennet has been transformed into a clay-like shape-shifting being, earning the name Clayface. Using his newfound powers, Ethan goes after vengeance on Chief Rojas, who suspended him earlier, and it's up to Batman and Bennet's partner Ellen Yin to stop their old friend. So let's talk about the Joker a bit first. I won't go into too much details though, as I plan to examine the Batman Joker more thoroughly in another episode review. I really like the Joker's motivation here. He's jealous of Batman being considered a bigger freak and menace than him. This is just so classic Joker, a vain diva who can't stand someone else hogging his limelight. It's very reminiscent of the '89 movie portrayal of the character too. I like the way Joker is written here. He's also very much a clown, my preferred take, and not an anarchist or whatever. I do have to say though that I think he could have had some funnier lines. To be honest, I never even as much as chuckled once at his material. These episodes clearly take a lot of inspiration from The Killing Joke as well, frequently bringing up the whole one really bad day idea. We even get a brief flashback to Joker's origin falling down into a vat of chemicals. For the most part it's a good Joker, but at the same time, the episode does feel a bit derivative of other works featuring the character. I mentioned both the '89 movie and The Killing Joke. I can't really say that the writer here does anything new or unique with Mr. J, nor does it ever surpass the source material it's using. I mean, I still vastly prefer Batman '89 and The Killing Joke to these episodes. So while it's pretty good, it's also kinda pointless in the end. I don't know, maybe at this point in time, I've just seen these tropes with the characters so many times that I'm bored by them. It's a been there done that type of feeling. I guess back in 2005 when this originally aired, these ideas hadn't been quite so mined as they are now. So I suppose I shouldn't be too harsh. Well, enough of the Joker, let's talk Clayface. So Ethan Bennet is essentially this show's version of Harvey Dent from the animated series, an old friend of Bruce who's introduced as a recurring character and then turned into a tragic and freakish villain. When the series originally aired, I hated this and felt insulted, as I wanted them to just use Harvey instead as opposed to this new guy. Now looking back at it, I don't really feel that way, because if they had done that, then they'd just been copying what Taz did, and that's clearly something they wanted to avoid. I still wish Two-Face had been on the show though, of course, and Scarecrow as well. I'll never forgive this series for not including them. Anyway, while Ethan is a character who's very similar to Harvey, there are some differences. Like, he's shown to not only be a friend of Bruce, but also an ally of sorts of Batman. Dent wasn't really that on Taz, although he is in the comics. Not that they were enemies, we just never really saw them together on the show. Another difference is that Bennet doesn't really have any mental issues before becoming Clayface, like Harvey did. This ultimately makes his transformation into a rogue less believable, just like his motivation is. Just why does Ethan turn to the dark side? The Joker supposedly drives him insane with some sort of hypnosis, but that feels like such a cheap way of doing it. It would have been far more interesting if the character actually went crazy on his own, not by some magic turn of a switch. Sure, he's then turned into a pile of goo, which certainly helps me buy his descent into mad villainy. Why does he go after Chief Rojas though? Wouldn't it have made more sense if he went after after the Joker, you know, the guy who actually caused him all this grief? His vendetta with Rojas is a bit weak. I get it why Bennet doesn't like the Chief, as he's forcing him to choose between Batman and the Force, and then on top of that he suspends him. These guys are not pals by any means, but it feels a bit like a stretch for Ethan to want to kill the guy. I suppose you could say that Joker brainwashed him into thinking this way, but that's a villain motivation I just don't find very compelling. Their vendetta needs to be more real, especially if they're played up as a sympathetic rogue, which Clayface is here. Don't get me wrong, Bennet is a pretty tragic character, and a more interesting villain than the Batman rogues we've taken a look at so far, but I don't find him to be as well written as, say, Two-Face on Taz, or even as Clayface was on that show. Another thing Ethan lacks is a proper theme. Two-Face has the duality, the split between good and evil, which fits perfectly with his gimmick and visual design. Basil Karlo, the original Clayface in the comics, and Matt Hagen on the animated series, who essentially was Karlo, had his career as an actor. This tied nicely into the idea of a man who can become any person by taking on their shape and adopting their demeanor. What ties Bennet to Clay and shapeshifting? As far as I can tell, nothing. You could have turned him into any monster basically. I guess if I really reach for something, you could say he has a lack of identity, as he's torn between Batman and the Gotham PD. He's forced to choose a side and therefore kinda lose sight of who he himself is. That works with a being which can transform itself into other people and take on their identities. Is that what you were going for? Because nothing like that is really made clear in the episodes, although it is one interpretation you could get out of it. The only one I can come up with. One thing I really like about this Clayface is the design. It looks really cool, and I actually prefer it to the Taz version, which may be blasphemy, especially coming from me, the big Taz fanboy. But what can I say? This the Batman look is a great one. I like that he's slimmer and less of a big bulky behemoth. The sort of blank, alien-shaped face is a nice touch, which would also fit in with the idea of a man who's lost sight of who he is. The bright green eyes and the grey skin, as opposed to the standard brown, are also good design choices. Ultimately, one of my favorite Clayface looks. So in conclusion, I know I've seemed really negative about Ethan Bennet in this video, but I do think he's a good villain, just not an amazing one. There's a lot of stuff about him that's great, and then there's some that's merely okay. What I find most fascinating about him is the fact that Bruce actually seriously considered revealing his identity as Batman to him. This makes the story of Ethan Bennet even more tragic, as it leaves so many potential scenarios of how things could have gone. If Joker hadn't kidnapped Bennet, then him and Bruce might have become crime-fighting partners. Before everything goes to hell, it's implied that Ethan is thinking about quitting the Force. If then Wayne had told him who Batman really is, he could have joined him in his vigilante crusade, and we would have gotten a new sidekick instead of a new villain. I feel you could probably refine the character with a slightly altered and improved take on his origin, although that will most likely never happen, as this version of Clayface seems to be solely associated with the Batman cartoon. I doubt the comics will ever adapt him. It is kind of funny that with all the Clayfaces from the comics, the creators of this show decided to not use any of them and instead create yet another one. So there you have it. That's the Batman episodes, the rubber face of comedy and the Clayface of tragedy. And as always, remember, Arkham Asylum awaits you in the next video.